Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and today we'll make a custom base for my new fixture table. Just to give you an idea of scale between the different tables that I've had, the one behind me here is my old welding table. It's roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, and the new one here is 3 feet by 4 feet, and I can extend it however I want. And the weight of just the top of this is around 600 pounds. The bottom of this is around 150 pounds. And that table there weighs maybe about 75 pounds, if that. And the reason why I've found out why you need such a heavy table for welding especially, is because it actually acts like a heat sink. So when you're welding, the metal gets really hot, and the more it heats up and cools down, the more warpage you get out of it. And if you have a really thin table and that kind of stuff, the table warps on you, but also what you produce can also warp on you during that process. With a larger, thicker table, that acts like heat sink, so whatever heat you throw into what you're working with gets sucked in through the table, and it really reduces the amount of warpage that you end up having as metal heats up and cools down during the welding process. Now this here is a fixture table, and the other one was just my homemade table using flat bar. The advantage of a fixture table over, let's say, a plate table, which was my other option, was maybe going 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch thick metal. The problem with that is no matter how thick the metal is, unless you machine it flat, it would never be flat. You'll have some high surfaces, low surfaces, that kind of stuff. You have some variation, which I experienced a lot of on the other table there. But the nice thing about flat bars, you have enough flat bars, eventually you end up with something flat. The disadvantage is if you have to do something small, you don't have enough sort of bridges, so to speak, to even things out. And that's where this has a huge advantage, because small or big, everything's totally flat, parallel, and square when you're working on it. And this is the biggest project I've done with this setup here so far, was just building the bottom here. And I noticed it was 9-day compared to using my old welding table. And the other advantage to this table over the old table is you'll notice this is metal. This is 2-inch square 1-inch wall tubing, and the other one is 2x4s. So I never had a fire with the 2x4s, and it did its job when that's all I had back then. And this, I don't have to worry about fire. I don't have to stay in the shop for an extra half hour to an hour just to make sure no sort of sparks went somewhere they're not supposed to and end up burning down my shop. So this is dramatically better in every way. It also has industrial casters on it, which you can see here. And the other one didn't have casters. Well, it didn't really matter on the other one because it weighed so little, I could push it around. But having casters, again, when you have large projects on here that might weigh a lot, you're able to spin things around and so forth. It's just wonderful to work with. So when it comes to welding, one of the first things you need to learn how to do relatively quickly is cutting tubing and other sort of metals. And like woodworking, I like working from as raw material as possible. So if I'm building a metal project, I prefer to work from the tubing and the structural steel right off the bat instead of something that's sort of preformed. It's just more fun. So here you can see what a fixture table does. It actually holds things down. It's important, not as much for warping, because if metal's going to warp, there's no clamp or anything that's going to hold it down if you're that bad with heat distortion. What it does do, though, is that it allows you to sort of nudge things so that everything's 90 degrees before you start, and everything's, the proper angle and so forth. And after that, once you tack weld it, again, tack welding doesn't introduce a lot of heat to the metal, so it's fine. And for this case here, I use flux core. And what that does is holds everything in place so that then I can actually do the full welding, which I'm doing here with the stick. It's 7018, by the way. And that's full welds all the way around. Now the reason why I'm doing full welds all the way around is because this table will hold a lot of weight. Just the top of it is 600 pounds. Anything I throw on top of that will weigh more. And if I ever have to stand on the table on top of that, another 200 pounds and so forth. So I want to make sure, unlike my old wooden table, is that whatever weight I threw on this within reason, I wasn't worried about it folding on me. Now, the fixture table actually came with legs, and there are 4 little pedestals made out of metal, which I'm sure are really, really solid, but I just didn't feel comfortable with them whatsoever. And just 4 little pedestals holding that much weight, and then if you're pushing it around and rolling it around, it's not going to end well, I think. So that's why I decided just to get some structural steel and make my own. Now the other advantage to this process here is that because now I have my own table, I can customize the underside however I want. And I have some ideas of what I want to do, but I want to slowly build it out. I find that's a better process, especially for metal where you can't really screw things up. And I did screw this project up, by the way. You'll find out about that a little bit later. But if you build things as you use them, then you're better off, you're able to build something better overall than if you just sort of envision in your head how everything's supposed to go, then you build it and you go, oh, well, I should have put this here and I should have put that there. So that's my thinking, at least based on experience. So here I'm just using a chop saw to cut all the metal. Before I got this chop saw, I did a lot of research, and it was either an abrasive saw or a chop saw. And the advantage of a cold saw is that it's a cold cutting process. There's no heat introduced to the metal while you're cutting it. But the other advantage is all the fumes and the debris and the smoke and all that stuff. You don't have to deal with it. It's just a cold cutting process, which is wonderful. That's why I spent more money and I got that, because that's eventually what you upgrade to anyways. You might as well just cry once and buy it and be done with it. So here you can see all the fixtures. I don't have the fixtures yet for the actual table. I'm using wood clamps and that kind of stuff, and that works totally fine. The only purpose of those clamps and stuff is to hold things before I tack them, and then to make sure that they don't move after I tack them. That's the whole reason for them. I wasn't doing full welds on the actual table itself because I didn't need to. It was very, very solid. And the nice thing about going from flux core to stick like this here, and I prefer using stick whenever and however I want. The reason for that is because, I don't know, the flux core just seems to dissolve from the heat of the stick. So I can put all the tack welds I want, and when I go over it with the stick, I don't even feel that there's a tack weld there. It just goes straight through. I don't have to grind it down. So here I'm just doing full welds all the way around, and the disadvantage of stick is eventually you run out of stick and you need to replace it. As long as you use a wire reel and remove all that extra stuff, you're fine to continue where you left off. And I burn the sticks almost down to almost nothing. There's no point having a bunch of sticks that you throw out in the garbage. It's a consumable. You might as well use as much of it as you possibly can. And for this project here, when I go to college and I do lab projects, everything is almost as perfect conditions as possible. So whenever I do projects on my own, what I like to do is make the conditions not as good. So things move on you, you're at the wrong angle, you have to use the wrong hand and that kind of stuff. And I learned that from one of the teachers there. He basically told me that, or he told the whole class actually. He said, when you get in the field or you have a customer project on something that you cannot move, that's not the time you want to learn how to do something out of position or at a weird angle or uncomfortable and so forth. You want to practice doing that, whenever you have the opportunity to. And that's what I did. That's what I took to heart, and that's what I did for this project here. Now, again, this table weighs a lot, so I want to make the movements of it as little as possible. And some of these positions are definitely not the best. Some of the angle of the rod is not the best and so forth. But again, it's incredible how much metal can hold, even with a small little tack weld. If I tack weld, I tack welded this frame here, and there's no way you're able to physically move it around, even just with the tack welds. And then introduce full welds everywhere, nothing moves anywhere. So even if worst comes to worst, let's just say half my welds just break apart, this thing will still hold. Nobody's life depends on it. So that's the time to learn how to do things the wrong way, so that it improves your welds when you're doing it the right way, and it gives you some experience on when conditions are not optimal. So what I did here is, yes, I have a CNC plasma cutter along with a bunch of other tools, but I don't do a lot of manual plasma cutting other than cutting down metal to bring it to the scrapyard. So I figured this is a great way to get around to doing that, and it's a great learning opportunity, so that's what I did. I had some small plates in the scrap bin, so I just cut out the holes, and that's where the caster will fit into, that I screw into, that holds the table. Now, I think each one of those casters could hold 500 or 600 pounds, and this table at the most maybe 200 pounds each caster. and then whatever I throw on there, I'll never come close to the limit of these casters. And that's something you want to make sure you do. I actually have casters on my plasma table and everything else. Now here, if you look at it, there's a mistake. And the mistake was I was supposed to put the casters on the other side, because now the table was too tall and not wide enough for the fixture table to fit on top of. And I only noticed that after I put it on the floor, of course. And so what I did is, well, I'm not going to take them off because they're full welds and they don't really damage anything. They're just sitting there. If anything, they make the table more rigid because they're full welds in all the corners. So I just decided to grab some other scrap plate, and these were definitely not, not the best scraps that I had, but they were all the same thickness. So that's what I ended up using. After I plasma cut them all with a manual torch, just made all the holes and did exactly the same process that I did previously. So you put them where they're supposed to go, you tack weld them with the flux, and then you full weld with the stick. What you see there are the lines. Those represent the 2-inch squareness of the tube that they're going to go onto. Because you don't want this hole to go through a tube, because then the caster pylon, whatever you want to call it, goes right through. You want it to be unimpeded. And the mistake I did the first time I did this was that I put the holes too close to the corners. So then I had a lot of trouble trying to wrench them into the proper place. So in this case here, I put them a 1/4 inch off, set even more, and I was able to put them in place absolutely no issue at all. And that's basically how you make a table base that's very, very solid. That's all I did for this project here. I have an idea to use expanded metal for the bottom so I can use it for storage, have another sheet of metal on the top to hold the stuff that falls through the fixture table. Lots of little plans here and there, and we'll see how it goes as I build projects, what I need to add to the table, what I need to take off. So like everything else in the shop, it's an evolution that's done by increments, and I find that's a better final product than just trying to think of everything in one shot and doing it there. To give you an idea of dates, I just noticed I did a welding tag for my old table and I welded it to it and I completely forgot about it. And I just noticed it earlier today, and it says March 2018. So March 2018, I made this table when I knew nothing about welding, and it's stuck together and it's been working fine ever since. But now I've gone almost 2 years full-time in college learning how to weld between my business and everything else. Now I know what I really need, and what I really needed was this thing here to bring my projects up to the next level. Of course, you can make things that are not, you can do projects that on a surface that is not flat, not level, not parallel, and so forth, and doesn't hold things down. But all you do is give yourself so much more work, because now you need to account for those variations to produce something that isn't those variations. And that's just a crazy amount of work. So if you have small projects regarding welding, let me know. We'll make them for you and ship them right to your door.